Have you ever felt like you're not fully here? Like part of you is always watching from behind the veil? You walk through the world, but the world doesn't quite reach you. You sense things before they happen. You feel truths no one else is talking about. And when you try to explain it, no one really understands. Carl Jung knew this type of soul. In fact, he said it might be the most mysterious of all. The introverted intuitive type presents a special problem. He is very difficult to understand, for he is never to be found where his position is visible, but is always seeking a secluded spot where he can live apart with his inner images. In the vast landscape of the human psyche that Jung so meticulously mapped, there exists a type of consciousness that lives between dimensions, never quite anchored in the present, but always reaching toward something unseen. This isn't merely about rarity. It's about a profound psychic structure, the introverted intuitive. They are guided not by what is, but by what they feel is emerging by inner images, subtle premonitions, and ancient archetypal structures that whisper just beyond the veil of common perception. Think of it this way. Their mind doesn't operate on linear logic or empirical proof. Its compass is internal. It senses meanings that have yet to take form, perceives psychic shifts before they break the surface of consciousness, and is guided by a deep, almost visceral sensitivity to the invisible. To this person, the concrete world with its practical demands and rational codes can often feel strangely banal, even irrelevant. This isn't born of arrogance or disinterest, but from a focus that is perpetually drawn to another dimension, a symbolic plane that often runs ahead of our present time. For them, facts are merely shadows cast by something far more essential, something still stirring in the womb of potential. Jung described this soul as someone who perceives what is about to be, but is not yet. Theirs is a perception tuned to potentiality, to the psychically virtual, to the silent currents forming in the collective unconscious. This unique frequency makes the introverted intuitive acutely sensitive to the cultural, spiritual, and existential transformations that announce themselves long before they become headlines. But this profound sensitivity, as powerful as it is, comes with a heavy price. The world around them rarely operates on the same wavelength. Society demands proof, hard data, tangible results. And what this individual perceives is, by its very nature, intangible, at least at first. The result is a chasm, a deep abyss between the world they see internally and the world that others expect from them. Have you ever felt it? That quiet certainty about a person you've just met? That unsettling feeling of a rupture in the air just before a crisis unfolds? That gut sense of an outcome long before the facts line up to confirm it? And when you tried to voice it, were you met with silence, or worse, with dismissal, even ridicule? If so, you understand their plight. Over time, the introverted intuitive learns to keep silent. They learn to retreat, transforming their inner world into a private, impenetrable sanctuary. And it is right here in that sacred silence that the true danger begins. Jung left us with a stark warning. When this type of person fails to find a way to translate their visions into language, art, or concrete action, they risk being consumed by them. The inner world, which should be a fountain of revelation, becomes a prison. The symbolic images, when left unintegrated, begin to dominate the psyche with a terrifying autonomous force. The individual ceases to be the one who contemplates the images. They become the one possessed by them. It is here that Jung's dark prophecy takes shape. The gift of deep intuition, if left unbalanced, can curdle into a process of profound dissociation. In this journey together, we will explore this trajectory in all its depth. We will understand precisely how this mind functions, what its specific perils are, and most importantly, what immense transformative potential it holds when it finally discovers its path of expression and integration. The path of the introverted intuitive is not an easy one, but it is a journey of incredible significance. It is a journey between worlds. And to understand this crossing is to illuminate not only a specific type of person, but the deeper mysteries of the human soul itself. Within Jung's typological system, intuition is considered an irrational function. This doesn't mean it's illogical. It means it operates beyond the confines of logic and direct sensory experience. For the introverted intuitive, this function is turned radically inward. Unlike its extroverted counterpart, which scans the external world for new possibilities, introverted intuition plunges into the depths of the personal and collective unconscious. It doesn't capture what is seen, but what emerges from the most ancient symbolic layers of the psyche, often without context, warning, or immediate explanation. Jung described this as the ability to perceive raw, psychic images, symbolic forms that have not yet been shaped into thought, feeling, or action. The introverted intuitive lives in constant, intimate contact with these images. They see not with the eyes of the body, but with the eyes of the soul. What appears to be an ordinary situation to others might for them pulse with hidden meanings, invisible tensions or patterns that repeat in silence. Their mind is an antenna tuned to signals that have no words but possess a profound waveform and psychic energy. When integrated, this sensitivity is a powerful source of insight. This individual can grasp the deep meaning of events, understand the unconscious motivations of others, and anticipate change before it's even a whisper on the wind. Yet, on the other side of this coin, this same sensitivity leaves them vulnerable to a kind of internal dispersion. Their sensation function, the very thing that keeps us grounded in the present moment in our bodies, is often their most underdeveloped aspect. It's easy for them to drift, to become unmoored from objective reality as their intuition begins to function on its own. A ship without an anchor lost in an ocean of internal imagery. This inner architecture isn't chaotic, but it is untamable. The symbolic images arise from psychic necessity, not conscious choice. When channeled well, these visions become the seeds of creation, transformative ideas, healing symbols, revelatory narratives. But if they are not understood and processed, they can accumulate like psychic static, leading to confusion, paralysis, and a breakdown of rational thought. The individual then begins to live not in the world, but in a kind of self-reinforcing parallel reality. For the introverted intuitive understanding, the very mechanics of their own mind is the first step toward freedom. They must learn the delicate art of distinguishing a revealing symbol from a baseless fantasy. This requires time, silence, and an internal framework. But it also demands a warning. No matter how mesmerizing this inner world may be, it is riddled with traps. Next, we will venture into these shadows, exploring the precise moment when a symbolic vision, failing to find its voice, begins to curdle into delusion. Introverted intuition possesses a quality that makes it both fascinating and perilous. It does not live in the present. Its very nature is future-oriented, directed toward what is to come, toward that which is not yet manifest, but insinuates itself at the edges of consciousness. The introverted intuitive lives on a threshold, perpetually between the now and the not yet. They sense the approach of events, perceiving archetypal shifts in the cultural and psychic fabric long before they take concrete form. This capacity for anticipation makes them, in Jung's words, akin to a prophet, someone who sees what others cannot. But herein lies the fundamental dilemma: what they see cannot be proven. What they feel cannot be justified with facts, and what they intuit rarely finds an echo in those around them. This creates a constant grinding conflict between the inner clarity of their vision and the stark lack of external validation. They begin to either doubt their own sanity or retreat into their perception with such absolute conviction that they reject the world entirely. In either case, the tension between the perceived invisible and the denied visible begins to corrode the soul. Jung offered a powerful example, a patient who, in analysis, described a vivid, terrifying image of a black snake coiled in her abdomen. As their work progressed, she envisioned the snake rising through her body until it finally emerged from her mouth, transformed into a serpent with a golden head. To an outsider, this sounds like a delirious fantasy. But for Jung, it was a breathtakingly clear symbol of inner transformation, the process of individuation taking visual form. The black snake represented repressed dark content that, once confronted and integrated, was reborn as a symbol of wisdom and healing. This story perfectly illustrates the language of introverted intuition. It doesn't speak with logic, it speaks with living images. It doesn't point to causes, it reveals destinies. The crisis arises when these images find no external language, when the symbol is not translated into creation, reflection, or action. At that point, the vision, once a source of revelation, begins to close in on itself. The mind loses its ability to distinguish insight from illusion. What was once symbolic wisdom becomes solitary delirium. The line between revelation and delusion is razor thin, and the introverted intuitive walks it every single day. For their intuition not to become a psychic labyrinth, it is crucial to understand the mechanisms that can lead to a rupture with reality. In the next part, we will explore this process with unflinching honesty, the moment when the unexpressed symbol begins to dominate the subject completely, leading to archetypal inflation and the loss of one's grip on the real world. The introverted intuitive is by their very nature a solitary figure. This isn't a matter of preference, but of psychic architecture. Their attention is oriented toward what cannot be seen, what has not yet taken shape, what emerges from the unconscious in symbols, visions, and premonitions. However, this inner focus, when it fails to find a bridge to the external world, creates fertile ground for profound identity crises and, in more extreme cases, delusions of grandeur. Jung called this process inflation, the moment when the ego, flooded by the immense power of unconscious contents, becomes inflated and begins to identify with them, losing all sense of its own human limits. This phenomenon unfolds subtly. The introverted intuitive, by perceiving deep symbolic patterns, may start to believe they have been chosen for a special mission. This sense of uniqueness, while initially a legitimate reflection of their sensitivity, can twist into a messianic illusion. The individual begins to see themselves as a bearer of absolute truths, an unrecognized visionary, a prophet rejected by a blind and ignorant society. Criticism from others is no longer feedback, it's persecution. Doubt from a friend is no longer a check on reality, it's a sign of their inferiority. Isolation deepens not as a painful consequence, but as a righteous justification. No one understands me because I am more evolved. This kind of psychic inflation is so dangerous because it dissolves the capacity for self-criticism. The individual begins to live entirely within their own symbolic narrative, with no clear boundary between an archetypal force and their own concrete reality. They identify with the powerful images rising from within, the wise one, the martyr, the prophet, and in doing so, they lose contact with their own ordinary, flawed, beautiful humanity. This over-identification with archetypes leads to a psychic fragmentation. The intuitive function, which once offered glimpses of profound meaning, now becomes a vehicle for escape. Practical life is neglected. Relationships become merely instrumental props in their inner drama. Any contradiction to their vision is rejected as a threat. Jung observed that this pattern was tragically common in those who emotionally barricaded themselves against the world, resisting any form of adaptation. The greatest danger, he warned, was not the isolation itself, but what followed the complete colonization of consciousness by the unconscious. When this happens, the ego ceases to be a mediator of reality and becomes merely a passive vessel for symbolic imagery. Perception becomes distorted. Judgment is contaminated, and existence begins to drift into a subtly delirious fantasy, a realm where everything seems to make sense, but nothing is rooted in the real. And yet, not every encounter with the symbolic leads to collapse. There is an antidote, and it begins with the power of expression, the sacred act of translating the invisible into form, word, gesture, or art. When a symbolic vision finds a pathway out of the private sphere and into the shared world, it is transformed from a prison into a creation. In our next segment, we will see exactly that, how intuitive figures who mastered this translation, like Kafka, Van Gogh, and Jung himself, transformed their internal landscapes into works that forever altered our collective consciousness. The psychic survival of the introverted intuitive depends almost entirely on their ability to give form to the invisible. For Jung, an unexpressed symbol becomes an autonomous agent within the psyche, a foreign body that has not been digested by consciousness. The only way to integrate these powerful inner images is to grant them a contour in the external world. Symbolic expression, whether through art, writing, music, or even ritual, is not an aesthetic luxury for this type. It is a vital necessity. This sacred process of translating symbol into reality is what separates the creative visionary from the fragmented mystic. When the introverted intuitive finds a way to externalize their perceptions, they perform a kind of alchemy. They transform their symbolic solitude into communication, their strangeness into language, their isolation into impact. What was once a private labyrinth becomes a shareable map. This act of creation has a dual healing effect. It not only relieves the immense internal pressure, but it also offers the collective world access to truths that were previously locked away in the unconscious. History is filled with the echoes of souls who almost certainly operated from this intuitive, introverted function. Franz Kafka, with his labyrinthine, dreamlike prose, channeled his profound symbolic alienation into works that still perfectly capture the absurdity of modern existence. Vincent van Gogh, unable to adapt to the practical world, poured his explosive emotional and symbolic vision onto the canvas. Each brushstroke a desperate, brilliant attempt to translate a boiling soul. Even Jung, who recognized this psychic structure within himself, conceived his most profound works as attempts to translate his own complex inner experiences into comprehensible systems for others. But this isn't about becoming a genius. What these figures teach us is that symbolic expression is the bridge between the inner and outer worlds. When this bridge doesn't exist, the symbol accumulates, turns in on itself, and begins to warp the perception of reality. But when there is a way out, the inner image becomes a work, a gesture, a word. And this act fundamentally reorganizes the psyche. The intuitive function ceases to operate in the dark and begins a conscious collaboration with the rest of the self. Creativity, then, is not just a gift. It is a process of psychological integration. However, even the richest symbolic expression may not be enough if it isn't rooted in the real. The introverted intuitive, by their very design, tends to neglect the body, the routine, the concrete limits of life. And this exposes them to a new danger. Creation can become compulsion. Inspiration can turn into escape. True lasting integration only happens when the symbol also finds a sensory foundation, when the heavens of intuition are balanced by the earth of sensation. In our next part, we will explore this crucial anchor, how the simplest practices connected to the body and the earth can serve as the ultimate antidote against psychic dissolution. If what you're hearing resonates on a deep level, you will find immense value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It's designed to break down Jung's core ideas and give you practical tools to understand the deepest parts of yourself. The link is in the pinned comment. The intuitive function, especially in its introverted form, operates outside of time, body, and linearity. It dives into the unconscious, gathers symbols and premonitions, and returns to the surface carrying visions that feel alien to the concrete world. This is what gives the introverted intuitive their enigmatic brilliance, but it is also their greatest vulnerability. Without an anchor, without a solid foundation in the here and now, this powerful intuition risks becoming a whirlpool. This is precisely why Jung insisted on the critical importance of integrating the inferior function sensation. Sensation is the function that keeps us connected to the present moment, to our bodies, to the material world. It is the part of us that perceives what is tangible. The warmth of the sun on your skin, the bitter taste of coffee, the solid weight of a book in your hands. For the introverted intuitive, who often dismisses these perceptions as mundane or irrelevant sensation, can feel like a foreign language. But it is exactly this language that provides the antidote to their excessive abstraction. It is in the grounding materiality of simple things that this type finds its balance. In the act of walking, cooking a meal, tending to plants, engaging in a manual craft, or simply honoring a daily routine. Returning to the body and daily routine doesn't lessen their depth. It actually sustains it. When this individual learns to alternate between the deep dive of intuition and the solid ground of concrete practice, their visions cease to be disorienting labyrinths and instead become deep, nourishing roots. They become capable of walking between worlds, the inner and the outer, the invisible and the tangible. This transit is the hallmark of true psychic maturity. The symbol then ceases to be an object of passive, overwhelming contemplation and transforms into a real guiding force that shapes life decisions and relationships, not as an infallible oracle, but as a steady compass. Everyday rituals in this context assume a profoundly therapeutic function. They don't need to be grand or esoteric. It can be as simple as lighting a candle at dawn, writing in a journal at the end of the day, or intentionally organizing one's workspace. These small, deliberate acts create an axis in the internal chaos. They are gestures that tell the unconscious, there is order here, there is a body here, there is reality here. And it is in this ritualized space that the symbol can descend to earth without shattering the psyche. The integration of sensation isn't a limitation on intuition. It is the very thing that allows intuition to flourish safely and powerfully. But even with symbolic expression and a firm anchor in the real, the introverted intuitive faces one final challenge: living their truth in a world that often rejects anything that cannot be measured, explained, or monetized. How do you sustain your vision in an environment dominated by logic, productivity, and immediacy? How do you continue listening to the symbols within when the world outside demands obedience to the concrete? This is the final confrontation, and it will be the theme of our final part. Even when the introverted intuitive develops the means for symbolic expression and builds practices to anchor themselves in reality, they still confront an obstacle that few perceive and which may be the most difficult of all: the challenge of sustaining their own inner truth in a world that systematically denies the invisible. Our modern culture focused on the concrete, the immediate and the measurable places its value on objective results, statistical data productivity, and visible performance. Deep intuitions, symbolic visions, and quiet internal reflections are not just ignored. They are often ridiculed, pathologized, or dismissed as utterly irrelevant. For the introverted intuitive, this creates a constant painful tension between fidelity to their own soul and the relentless pressure to adapt. At every turn, they face a choice: betray their inner vision to fit the collective mold, or remain true to themselves, even if it means facing marginalization, misunderstanding, and a profound loneliness. And this choice is not abstract. It manifests in the small, painful details of daily life. In conversations where they must silence what they truly perceive. In workplaces where their quiet depth is mistaken for weakness. In relationships where they cannot express what they see, feel, and sense without being labeled too intense or unrealistic. But this tension does not have to end in resignation. Jung argued that the great work of individuation requires precisely this: the courage to hold fast to the symbolic core of the self, even against the opposing forces of the collective. For the introverted intuitive living, their symbolic truth is not about withdrawing from the world. It is about navigating through it without losing their inner access. It is knowing that the vision they carry may never be fully understood or validated by others, and yet it must still be lived. Because in the end, the function of their intuition is not to please, to convince, or to win. It is to point toward paths that do not yet exist. Living symbolically in a materialistic society is a silent act of resistance. It is choosing depth over appearance, meaning over convenience. It is sustaining a connection with the invisible even when everything around you insists it has no value. But this type of soul, when they find the courage to remain true to what they see, becomes a quietly transformative force. Not by imposing themselves upon the world, but simply by revealing with their very presence that there is something more, something beyond the surface. And that revelation, no matter how subtle, has the power to touch, to disturb, and to awaken those who are ready to perceive it. If you feel you belong to this invisible world, if you live among symbols, intuitions, and premonitions that few seem to understand, share in the comments how you navigate this crossing. What strategies have you found to remain whole? How do you balance the world within and the world without? Your story could be a light for others walking this same silent path. And be sure to watch the next video. It is the natural continuation of this reflection and may hold the missing key to deepen this dive even further. It's an important one. I'll see you there.